Hey, beautiful people. I am Taja, also known as New Yogi Mommy. I would love to thank you for allowing me to hold space with you today. Let's go into our praying hands. Paying attention to how our breath flows into and out of our bodies. Let's set our intentions for today. Maybe our intentions is to take a little more time each day for ourselves and our self-care. Continuing to breathe through the nose and out through the mouth. On our next inhale, bringing our hands up and forward fold into our ragdoll pose, planting your hands onto your elbows. I am going to turn to the side so that you can see or get a better look. And continuing to breathe here. If you have a belly like me, remember to make room for that belly as we go deeper into this forward fold. Now we're going to begin our wide leg extended fold. Extend your legs as wide as possible, bending at the hip, planting both hands onto the mat, as close to the mat as possible, and breathe in here. You can begin to feel that nice stretch, and let's turn to our side, planting one hand on the ankle and the other hand as far up to the sky as possible, and breathe in here in this nice deep stretch. Let's go into our wide leg ragdoll pose. Breathe in here. And then we're going to begin to move over to the other side, planting our hands on our ankle, sending our other hand up to the sky as much as possible, and holding here. We're going to pivot, going into our extended side angle stretch, planting our hands onto the mat. You are also welcome to lift up halfway, bringing your prayer hands behind your back. If this is uncomfortable to you, please plant your hand onto the mat for stability, and let's pivot to our wide leg forward fold. Now we're going to begin to go to our other side in our extended side angle stretch. You can plant your hands on the mat or bring your hands behind your back in our half lift side angle. And let's plant our hands back onto the mat and breathe here before we pivot back to our wide leg forward fold. Bringing one vertebrae up at a time. We are going to go into our goddess pose, bending those knees as much as possible, lifting our hands and our gaze up along with it. And let's go into our mountain pose before we transition into downward facing dog, planting our hands and our feet on the mat as much as possible. We're going to go into our plank, chaturanga, untucking the toes for upward facing dog. Breathe here. Tuck your toes, sending those hips up to the sky, back into our downward facing dog. Three-legged pose. We're going to bend our knees and going into our runner's lunge before we lift up into our warrior one, sending both hands up to the sky, palms facing each other. We're going to pivot our hips to the front of the mat, Sending our hands parallel to the mat in warrior two before we drop our hand and the other hand up to the sky in our revolve warrior. And then we're going to go into our extended side angle before we lift up and go back into our warrior two. We call this the dancing warrior sequence. Let's plant our hands back to the mat, floating our feet to meet each other in our downward facing dog. Going into our high plank, chaturanga, untucking the toes in our upward facing dog. Tuck your toes, sending those hips back up in the sky in our downward facing dog. Three-legged dog. Planting our knees onto the mat in our runner's pose before we lift up in our warrior one on the other side of the body. Bringing our hands parallel to the mat, pivoting your hips in our warrior two. Dropping that hand down to the back of your legs, sending your gaze up in our revolve warrior before we go into our extended side angle, folding that elbow, planting it on your knee, sending your hand above your head, and then swaying back into our warrior two. Let's go back into our runner's lunge, downward facing dog, keeping our heads aligned with the arms, and walking into our ragdoll pose, swaying from side to side. I love bringing movement into this pose. It's so relaxing. And now we're going to lift up in our standing back bend and back down to our forward fold. Let's go down into tabletop and add some movement here. We're going in our cat-cow. Exhale and inhale as we continue to stretch our spine a little bit. Bringing both feet together, sending our hips back and widening your knees in our child's pose. And let's rest here for a couple of seconds. Keeping your arms extended above your head. And remembering to breathe. Begin to walk your hands towards your body, strengthening those knees. Let's add a little bit of movement before we go back to our normal activity. Cross your legs and sit down in our easy pose. Let's just take a few moments to gather our breaths and breathe here. And once again, I would like to thank you for allowing me to hold space with you today. Please check out my classes that's coming up in the next few days. Bye.